Hey friends, does this look familiar? This is the iPad mini. It's actually probably one of my favorite devices that Apple released this year. This iPad is so fun to use and it's something I use every day, but it's not something that I get to use for productivity as much. So even though I love this so much, what I'm actually using for work is this guy right here, the iPad Pro, which is also a fantastic device. So I want to kind of go over how I use it for productivity as a student and what it offers. Now, I gotta be honest, an iPad Pro is like a super overpriced tablet. I mean, just this tablet with the Magic Keyboard and the pencil cost me upwards of like $1,500 to $1,800. And that is a ridiculous amount of money to pay for something that you can't really do a whole lot with. But with that being said, I still do use it every day for notes and for productivity. And it actually is a really useful device for the cases that I use it for. And so I just want to go over those with you so you can understand the best way to utilize not only the iPad, but iPadOS 15, which is actually going to play a really huge role in this as well. So before we get started, I do want to preface this by saying iPadOS 15 is far from perfect, and I have a lot of issues with the unusable potential that the iPad Pro has, because the hardware is fantastic, it's incredible. You can do so much with the hardware theoretically, but it's so hindered by its software that it really is only super useful for a few certain tasks that I want to go over, which is really unfortunate because I would really like the software to catch up to the hardware so you can use the iPad as like your main device. But it's just sadly not there. And quite frankly, I'm not sure if we're gonna be getting there anytime in the near future. But with all of that out of the way, let's actually focus on what I do use it for and what I think is really useful with iPadOS 15 and an iPad Pro. So the first thing I wanna mention is the shelf feature. Now, the shelf feature is so great, and it's actually better than using multiple windows on macOS or on a Windows device, in my opinion. I use Notability every day for note-taking. And even though Notability released a really terrible update just very recently, it is an app that I really use a lot, and it has a lot of utility for me as a student especially. So on iPadOS, you can see here that I can have multiple different versions of Notability pulled up. So they're essentially different windows that I can pull up at the same time, and they can each have different notes that I've pulled up, so I can switch between them very quickly and intuitively. So this is a feature that I love a lot. And basically you can minimize the windows that you have open, which is a very basic concept, I understand. But on a tablet, especially on an iPad, this is a really revolutionary feature, believe it or not, because you couldn't really do anything like this before. So this has helped me a lot by managing what notes I have pulled open, not only for Notability, but even for like messages. You can have different messages apps pulled open, so different conversations up at the same time. Now the other thing is that multitasking has come such a long way in iPadOS 15. In fact, I think this is the best implementation of multitasking yet, and I really hope that multitasking does not change at all from this point forward, because it's just so intuitive now. Before, there were all these random gestures that you had to memorize on iPadOS, or formerly iOS for the iPad, and it was really confusing with each update to remember which gestures did what and what even the options were for multitasking. But now it's become really simple, and not only is it pretty intuitive to do with touch controls, it's also really easy to do with the trackpad. So over here you can see that if I just slide over on the side, I can always have this one slide over app open whenever I want. And usually what I like to keep on the side here is messages, but for the purpose of this video, I don't want to show you my messages, so I'm just showing the Notes app. But it's really cool. Whenever I need to take a quick note, I can just pull over from the side using my finger, or alternatively, I can push the cursor all the way to the right, and that pulls out the side over app. And then when I want to get rid of the app, I can either swipe with my finger or push the cursor to the right again, and the slide over app goes away and it's hidden. So the slide over feature has been greatly improved, and the fact that it's so easy to do on the trackpad and with touch with your finger is just a really easy way to multitask. Now, aside from that, the multitasking feature I love the most is that at the top of the iPad, whenever you're in an app, there are these 3 dots. And once you click on those 3 dots, you can decide if you want to move that app to the left, to the right, or take up the whole screen. So whenever you have an app open, you can multitask it or split it to the side of your device on either the left or right side, which is really an easy way to bring up different apps to multitask. I remember in previous versions of iOS, it was really messy because you either could swipe up from the dock and drag the app onto your screen so that you can multitask that way, or you would have to go to the home screen, click on an app, and then put one to the dock and drag it in. It was just very confusing. It was a whole mess. It was like harder to learn how to multitask than to just not multitask at all. But with iPadOS 15, multitasking is just so much easier and so much more intuitive that I find myself doing it all the time. So as long as you have those three dots, they're always going to be at the top of every app you're using. So you know that you can just click on one of the options of where you want that screen to move on either the left side of your screen or the right side, and then you can multitask really easily that way. So those are the three really useful features that I use iPadOS for productivity and for multitasking specifically, and it has really been a game changer. I think on paper, it doesn't sound like it's such a big deal, but when you have a device like a tablet where all the screen is being taken up by the app, it's really important that multitasking is very easy to do because you can't resize app windows and drag them to different corners of your screen like you would be able to do on macOS or on Windows. So multitasking is that much more important in order to easily switch between apps and get things done. And the fact that the Magic Keyboard has such an intuitive trackpad on it and the gestures are really easy to learn and they're not anything too crazy, it really makes experience a lot more seamless. Now that being said, there is one really glaring issue that I at least have, and this might just be a personal problem with iPadOS, and that is the animations. So you might remember that in macOS, whenever you minimize something, the standard animation is called the genie effect, where the window kind of genies into the dock whenever you minimize. And I hate that effect, so I always turn on the scale effect, where the window doesn't make that genie animation and it just kind of collapses into the dock. I think the animations for the shelf on iPadOS are really frustrating and I really hate them. They take way too much time to minimize, and I would really hope that we would have an option in the future where we can get rid of that animation. Now again, most people probably won't even notice this. The general consumer does not care about this at all. But as someone who's a little bit more invested in kind of the techie side of things, design aesthetic, UX, UI, the whole experience, I really want that to be an option where you can get rid of that genie effect. It's not even a genie effect really, it's just a really terrible animation. But if you could get rid of that animation, I think that would make iPadOS a lot better. Just in a small way, just a small update I think that would really improve the use case for iPadOS for myself. Now aside from that, iPadOS is still not a great update in terms of what direction the iPad is moving forward in. And I think that it really needs to have a lot more utility available for it in order to really fully realize the potential of the iPad. Because right now, honestly, all I use it is for note-taking and maybe messaging and like doing light research or web browsing. And that's crazy considering the amount of hardware that is put into this device. It could be used for a lot more if it had the proper software built in, and it just doesn't right now. And that's really sad because this is basically a $1,000+ glorified note-taking device, which is not something that most people really need. So it's kind of a niche scenario, and I always recommend the iPad Pro. I've said it so many times. I always recommend the iPad Pro for students because of the 120 Hz. That really changes the game in terms of note-taking, and I really think it's a worthwhile investment if you're gonna be keeping this iPad for some time. But I also understand that this is a ridiculous amount of money to be spending on a glorified notebook for all intents and purposes. And, unfortunately, that's just what it is. It has so much untapped potential, and it makes me kind of sad because it could be so much more, and right now it's just not. Which is why I really appreciate the iPad mini, because it doesn't pretend to be something more than what it is. But with all that being said, this has been how I use my iPad for school and for productivity. Let me know if you guys are also using an iPad Pro or if you're using an iPad Air. I know there's a huge debate about that whenever I bring that up, but I'm always gonna go with an iPad Pro over an iPad Air for the 120 Hz. If the 120 Hz ever comes on iPad Air, then I would definitely make the switch. But that's all I'm gonna say. Thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, I'm done.